I've been realizing lately that I've sort of come full circle in my thinking about soil fertility over the years. Back in the 70s when I first started farming organically, I was all excited about organic matter and how that was really the basis of soil fertility. And then I went to graduate school in the 80s and I learned all about the elements and chemistry and everything. And I remember one of my professors, my soil fertility professor, I came into his office all excited about organic farming. I talked to him for a few minutes and finally he said, well, it depends upon how far back in the horse and buggy era you want to go. And so I never talked about organic farming again until much later. Anyway, Iowa, I think, has some pretty interesting things to offer relative to carbon and organic matter. So basically, I've come around, and I've come around to the idea that I'm really excited now that soil organic matter can really trump chemistry in the soil tremendously. And that's something I'm trying to pursue when I'm looking at what others are doing. In Iowa, we like to brag that we have some of the most productive soils in the world. When the Last Glacier left 12,000 years ago, you know, these are the newest soils in north central Iowa. But think about it, when that glacier left, there was no soil at all. It was a geologic wasteland. And only as plants, that material brought in from Canada, northern Minnesota, dumped in Iowa. And only as plants and animals colonized that and put organic matter in it, actually created soil in 12,000 years, that ecological process. And it didn't take any fertilizers or pesticides and so on to make it happen. If we think about the prairie process, and what I'm trying to do on my farm is mimic that process of ecology. And we know that the prairie plants are tall and deep-rooted. I think I have a little slide here, yeah, one of the roots. And when the bison would come in through and graze off that plant, when it was short, it didn't need all that root mass, so it sloughed some in the ground, grow new tops and more roots. So these grazing episodes would pulse that organic matter deep in the soil. And I think that's what we're doing, mimic that process in our grazing systems. This farm we moved to in 1996. And this was a farm that had basically been run down. All that was left was this little old corn crib. And the soils were beat up pretty bad. We're in southern Iowa. And the Last Glacier left there about 500,000 or 2 million years ago. And so the soils are not as good. And they have a compacted layer, a pedogenic compacted layer about a foot down. And this farm had been in corn and soybeans for many years. It's pretty hilly. And this is what my waterways looked like. All of them were eroded away. And on the hillsides, a lot of places, the whole topsoil was gone. I'm down to the B horizon. So kind of like the glacier just left, I'm starting over again. So what we did is and of course at the foot slopes of the hills is where a lot of the soil ended up. So what we did is trying to mimic, again, how nature built the soils. We put in a diversity of grasses and legumes, different. These are cool season, of course. And we split the farm up into about 60 paddocks. So you can see here this thing. I have a pointer on it. Oops, that's not it. Well, you can see the lanes going through so the cows can get to the pastures. And normally these are about 1.5 acres to 2 acres each, the paddocks. And so after each milking, the cows get a fresh paddock. And often we'll split them in half and give them half a paddock for about 80 to 90 cows when the grass is really growing quickly. So then I think we can actually speed up by quite a bit the process that nature used to create these soils by very intensively doing what nature has done. And so you can see here the electric fence between and where the cows have grazed and where they're going next. And this is what we're not doing. This is what you see a lot of the grazing around the Midwest is where the cows are in the same pasture all the time. And you end up with short bluegrass. And of course, that's very shallow rooted. And when you get a drought, it's not resilient at all. And this little diagram kind of shows what happened. This is called set stocking, what you saw in the last photos. When the grass is short, the roots are very minimal. And so many of these pastures around the Midwest are really not building up at all. They're actually going backwards. And Iowa State University scientists tell us that since we started farming in Iowa, we've lost about half our topsoil to erosion and about 60% of our organic carbon, organic matter, to oxidation. So we've been deficit spending our ecological capital all these years. And so that's what we want to do is return that, change that process. And if we do a more managed grazing, we take half the grass and leave half, we see that the roots are much more, they survive much better and are much more aggressive. And this is an example of what some people are calling mob grazing now, which is kind of mimicking the bison going around the prairie again. And where the grass grows tall, you have tall grass, and you come in and they graze about half of it, and with the rest of it, they just knock down. And so that grass is laying on the ground, and it'll help feed the soil food web and all. You can see the manure scattered throughout as well. So seems to be a pretty quick way of building organic matter. And this photo, I believe, came from Alan Williams, who is a scientist in Georgia. And this is not replicated data, but over 10 years, that was what he called adaptive high stocking density grazing. He compared that to the continuous grazing, the bluegrass kind of thing, and looked at the carbon over 10 years, the difference. And you can see that his grazing system doubled the amount of carbon in the soil over those 10 years. And whereas if it was a medium kind of management, it didn't build it up as fast. And so that's really exciting to see that you can build the soil that quickly, carbon, just by managing your animals. And what's more exciting to me is this is a farmer in North Dakota, Gabe Brown, who maybe some of you have heard of, who's been doing not only with grazing, but with cover crops and so on, a very intensive thing with crops on the land all the time. And he compared, and this is not replicated again, he compared his neighboring farms, an organic farm, and a no-till farm with low diversity, a no-till farm with higher diversity, and his operation. And and he hasn't put anything on, no fertility, since 2007. And you can see, for example, with carbon, he has a much higher level of water extractable carbon than the other systems. But what's really mind-blowing is look at the potassium and phosphorus. Now he says he didn't put any on. And so, these are, of course, our young soils with a lot of base nutrients, but apparently he's releasing quite a bit of that from the soil. And I think this is an area that we need to look at a lot more in our research to see what is really happening. Because organic farmers often get into this kind of a cycle where we have to balance our calcium, magnesium, and all this prescriptive kind of stuff that I think is a little bit off course. And the research in Iowa shows it really is not that productive. I think that, again, carbon can, or biology can trump chemistry to a great degree. And I think we need to pursue that a lot more. So the things I'm trying to do on my farm is trying to have living plants on the soil at all times, or at least residue, or also residue, till as little as possible, and as much plant diversity as possible. Now I'm just getting going on this, so I'm not there yet, but these are my goals. And with organic, I'm organic, certified organic, it's of course sometimes difficult to not till, but we're going in that direction. Now compare that in Iowa, 2/3 of Iowa's land surface every year is covered in corn and soybeans. And about 2% of the land is covered with cover crops every year at the end of the season. And so when you drive around, you see most of the landscape really does not do that. It doesn't have living cover on it, and often it's tilled in the fall, which breaks all these principles, all these rules that we're trying to work for. And if you look at our modern industrial agriculture, compare that to a natural ecology, all the diversity, the self-sufficiency, the conserving, recycling, in nature in a good ecology, there really isn't any pollution. The waste of one species is food for other species, and it's recycled and recycled. Whereas when you got a monoculture, takes a lot of input, but you have a monoculture and it tends to be leaky. And Iowa is famous for, nowadays in the news, for its nitrate pollution. Anybody heard of Iowa's nitrate in drinking water? Probably so. There's even been a lawsuit about it because the water for the Des Moines waterworks coming down the river is so high, often high in nitrate. Well, most of Iowa's good soils have tile drainage, so about 3 or 4 feet down. Otherwise, a lot of the land, it wouldn't be farmable at all. It's a prairie pothole region. They really don't have good drainage. So we have subsurface drainage in most of it. And the thing is, nitrate is soluble, so when the water goes through and there's nitrate available, it'll take it with it. And when you have the crop land bare most of the time, of course, that's a problem. And we all are familiar with the dead zone. Nitrate is a living nutrient for that. Now in Iowa, we have what's called a nutrient reduction strategy. It's a plan of how we're going to fix that. And what we found, first of all, at the research at Iowa State is that 93% of the nitrogen comes from agriculture that gets in the river. 79% of the phosphorus loss comes from agriculture. And the goal for the dead zone remediation for Iowa's goal is to reduce our nitrogen loss to the rivers by 41%. That's something to keep in mind because, well, I want to first look at this. This is actually some kind of old data, but it really illustrates the problem. And the essence of the problem, as you may know, is that corn and soybeans are annual crops. So they have live roots in the soil for only 4.5 to 5 months of the year. So during most of the year, there are no live roots in the soil to scavenge nitrate when water takes it down. And so when water percolates in the fall and the spring, the nitrate is free to go. Whereas if you have a perennial, the research in Iowa shows if you have a perennial crop on there, you lose almost no nitrogen. This is from Minnesota, Giles Randolph, some of you probably know. Looking at, this is old data, but it's the same cropping systems we have today. looking at continuous corn, soybeans, and some perennials, how much nitrate was lost over 4 years in the tile drains. For continuous corn, 194 pounds per acre. Now compare that to the perennials. CRP is grass, perennial grass, alfalfa. And alfalfa is a legume, of course, but hardly any nitrate escaped from the legume because the perennial roots are there year-round and can scavenge that nitrate, which is, it seems obvious to us, but actually in Iowa, it's some reason the politicians can't understand it, and they don't, no, seriously, we can't really get on board trying to fix our nitrate problem because we first of all don't know how to, we haven't understood what it is. But also look at this, corn, soybeans. Soybeans we don't put nitrogen on, it's a legume. But soybeans leak almost as bad as corn. And some new research shows that soybeans can actually leak worse, nitrate worse than corn. And we don't put any nitrogen on. It's because there are no roots in the soil year-round. And this little graph illustrates that. In the spring when it warms up, the red line is the nitrification. The nitrogen from the soil organic matter begins to mineralize into nitrate. And so as it warms up, that happens before the corn or soybeans need the nitrogen. And so we have this nitrate being mineralized and put into the soil profile when there's nothing to take it up. And so this is a big area where we lose a lot of nitrogen to leaching. And then the corn and soybeans go through the life cycle, and then there's an area where it's vulnerable to leaching again. And so, of course, you can see if we put a cover crop in there, then we'd have another green blip here to take up that nitrogen if you had a good cover crop and hold it again in the spring. And so that's how we can reduce the nitrate leaching. And research at Iowa shows that a cover crop can reduce nitrate leaching by 30 to 65%, depending on how you manage it. And remember, our goal is 41% reduction. So the cover crop is key. But most of Iowa, as I said, does not have that. What's very interesting, some more recent research at ARS, Cindy Cambardella, she compared an organic rotation to conventional corn soybeans and found that the organic rotation reduced nitrate leaching by half, which is pretty exciting because our goal is 41%. And so just by converting to organic, a good rotation, and of course it has some perennials in there, and of course also that nitrogen from the perennials is released more in sync with the demand for corn as a subsequent crop compared to putting a slug of nitrogen on there. And the pasture, of course, did it as well. It reduced it by even more. And again, I wanted to remind that this is our goal, so we can actually surpass that. And I've been trying to do some work with this crimping rye, the roll down. Now compare that when you have, with this roller crimper of the rye, this rye will get like, this tall. A lot of biomass. You're shooting for about 8,000 pounds per acre or more. Whereas most cover crops in Iowa that are grown for water quality and then not very much is done, the rye gets about this high and then it's killed in the spring quickly with glyphosate. So it really doesn't add that much to the soil organic matter. As a matter of fact, I gave a talk recently with an organic farmer, it's pretty famous, not an organic farmer, a no-till cover crop farmer in Iowa who is pretty famous. And he's been doing it for years and he has a lot of benefits, but he couldn't find any soil organic matter increase, which is really astounding actually to see that. So normally this is my cultivator. It's a guided cultivator, and I can cover quite a bit of land and do a pretty good job with it. But look at that. You have all this bare space, you're tilling, and this is what we're trying to get away from. So the first year I did it, I came in with the mature rye, and I drilled in the soybeans first, came back. I didn't have a roller crimper, so I came in with a cultipacker. And actually, I found out that didn't work quite so well at first when I went the wrong direction. I had to go perpendicular or something, or else it caused a problem. But it did a great job of flattening it out. I waited a little longer because they didn't have a crimper. You're supposed to crimp at anthesis, flowering stage, so I crimped at milk stage just to give it, because the earlier you crimp, the more likely it is to pop back up. And if you wait a little longer, it'll stay down. Anyway, so up come the soybeans and away they went. And I was pretty excited. I mean, it works if you got there enough biomass. And the neat thing about it is that at the end of the year, after the soybeans are harvested, you have all that biomass yet, and underneath there the soil is moist, and you can see it just cooking away. But yet that residue is partially decayed. It's ready to go. I could take it and just break it apart, and so you could easily no-till into that again for the next cover crop. So that's the key, as I'm working towards, is constantly relaying something into the soil to keep building that soil. Because remember, I'm starting from a lower grade. In a lot of places, I'm starting from zero almost. Now, also energy-wise, compare that, this is not my farm, with cows in a feedlot, and they're just waiting for their meal, right? And so instead of them going out and grazing, You have to cut the forage and chop it and put it in storage and feed them and collect the manure and then haul the manure back out again. All those steps take a lot of energy. And probably without cheap oil, we never would have, of course, done that. But if you can let the cows do the work, and the key thing is the design and management of the farm. So after each milking, all we have to do is open the next gate in the lane. The cows go in the pasture. We close the gate. They harvest their own feed. They spread their own manure right where it needs to be. They enjoy their work. And because they're in their natural environment, eating the natural diet, they're a lot healthier. I mean, the last 3 years, our vet bill's been zero for a 90 cow herd. And no, we do a few little things on our own, but we've not had a vet problem. And our the average of a dairy cow in the confinement across the country is 2.5 years in the milking string. And our cows will last a lot longer. Our oldest cow now is just 16 years old in the herd, still milking. So I think it makes, but they don't give as much milk. It's kind of like eating white sugar. You get a lot of energy, you know. And cows that stand on concrete and eat corn, they get a lot of energy. They'll produce twice as much milk, but they won't last as long. And they have acidic stomachs and a range of problems that occur from it. So it's a lot more fun to do it this way, I think. And the other thing is that the cows are healthier, but also we think it's a healthier product. You've all heard higher in omega-3 fatty acids, conjugated linoleic acids. This is Susan, my wife. She makes butter from our milk in the summertime, and she makes it into ghee, clarified butter. And so she makes it in summer so that it's we have all those pasture benefits. Well, we ran out one winter, and from the same herd, she made some in the wintertime. It's pretty amazing that the same cow is, but on dry hay. So I think that it's a more healthy product as well. So it's better if you can manage it right, it's better for the soil, better for the diversity of the landscape. And if you manage them right, you get more and more diversity on the landscape instead of less and less. And it's better for the health of the animal and better for the health of the people who are consuming the product. A couple little things along the way is that we, for all these paddocks, we have a 6,000 gallon water tank on top of a hill above a pond. We have a pump in there with a solar panel, pumps that water up here, and then it gravity feeds to all the pastures. So the cows can access from both sides. We have it buried shallow. We use it spring, summer, and fall and blow it out for the winter time. So that's one thing that we do. It saves a lot of energy because southern Iowa does not have good water and well water, groundwater. We have to buy water. It's like city water pumped out in the countryside. It's very expensive. And we also have some frost-free waters for outwintering cows. This is on below that pond that was up on the other side of the dike. Gravity feeds to here, and this has a tube that goes in the ground about 8 feet, and the ground source heat keeps it from freezing very hard all winter long, and the cows can be out there. Another one here that's frost-free. It constantly overflows, but instead of overflowing in the front, there's a standpipe in the back that takes it out to a ravine. So a little trickle of water keeps it from freezing even when it's zero out. So we're trying to be also energy efficient if we can. And we use, these work pretty well, solar-powered electric fencers. We have solar panels for making hot water on our dairy processing plant. We put in a 40 kilowatt wind turbine a few years ago, and we're going to try to put more solar in. Now, one thing about our farm is, fortunately, it was neglected, and a lot of trees were around the fence lines and so on, which is great for wildlife and so on. But also, I like to have shade for the cows during the summer at the hot times of the year. And so I've been putting cows in shade where there are trees for the hot times, the daytime. But what I'm finding is I'm moving the nutrients under the trees, which is not what I want. So I've been, for several years wanting to do this. I finally bought a portable shade. And it works pretty well, and I can just move it wherever I need to be. Now, last year we had a severe drought, and so the worst drought I had in 25 years, actually. And so I put them out in a hayfield that I was going to return to a different crop and rotate out. And so I just gave them a little bit of grass every day, and gave them some hay, and I put them in there under the shade. And I could just give them a little bit every day if I wanted to. But after they're done, you can see, now I can move my nutrients wherever I want them. You saw that earlier slide where there's hardly anything there growing. Well, I can put cows right there and fertilize these areas and keep moving my shade around wherever I need the fertility. We heard something about resilience. Even the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture today was talking about resilience. He said it twice. I was pretty surprised. And we lack resilience very much in Iowa. We know, like I said, 2/3 of our landscape is in corn and soybeans, and they don't get planted until, in 2008 we had a flooding time, and the corn and soybeans didn't get planted until the 1st of June. And we had a tremendous flood, but there was a week where there was no rain, and like the first week of June. And I've been grazing, you can see the grass all around here. I've been grazing for like about 2 months already. But then there was 2 inches of rain in 1 hour. And this is what happened. I have this little creek going through my farm, and that 2-inch rainfall, it just made it a river 250 feet wide. You can see how it was here. And the thing is that 2-inch rainfall, because my cows have been grazing for 2 months already, the soil in that 1 week without rain had started to dry out. It was actually, I needed that rain, and it went down the cracks, and it was utilized pretty well on the perennial grasses. But upstream, so the cows had been grazing. But upstream, the corn had not been planted, the soils were saturated with water, and virtually none of that water went in the ground. It just came running off, and of course there should have been a grass waterway here, but even with no-till, it just ran it right off. And so these are not very resilient kind of systems, and we get flash flooding more and more now from this. Sure, in the middle of summer, it can take a little water, but in the spring, when we get these heavy rains, we're in trouble. Some research at Iowa State kind of illustrates that. They looked at how much rainfall would percolate into the soil in 1 hour, and they compared different systems. And they found that perennial systems would take 5 to 7 times more rainfall than the corn and soybeans. And so that really kind of shows how we get these flash floods. And which is interesting, that continuously grazed pasture, that little bluegrass, that didn't take any more rainfall in than the corn and soybeans did. And so another thing I'm trying to do here with is wintering the cows in a way that I can actually help build my soil. And I've been wintering the cows outside, out wintering them. And what I do is, we have a problem with tall fescue. It has an endophyte toxin that's not good for the cows, and they don't eat it anyway. And so it's an invasive. So when I get too much fescue in an area, I'll take the fences out between some paddocks and I'll winter the cows there. And every time I give them hay or silage, baleage, I'll move it to a new location, move it down the field. So when they eat it, they spread their manure there. And then we put a lot of bedding in it too. So by spring, we have a pretty good manure and carbon pack on the soil. And it's a very comfortable place for them. They prefer it out there. And when it snows, I'll put out bedding out for them to lay. And I want to get a lot of bedding. At first, I was kind of being a little stingy with the bedding, and I didn't want to, people call it a sacrifice area. I didn't want to sacrifice it. Now I call it what's the good word? It's a benefit area. Is actually, I'm building the soil. I don't mind at all and I have to give it a couple months rest next year because I'm building the soil. And so I have a bale and roller and a tractor. I need to get something a little better, a bale buster that can throw it out. And one thing I can do, the northwest wind comes from this way, and if I'm out wintering in an area that's away from shelter, then I can put in a windbreak of bales that I'm going to feed next. And when it's windy, I feed the hay here, and when it's not windy, I can feed the hay further off. And then I can put bales for next week in another area, and then feed those other bales and keep moving around. So now what I'm trying, at first what I did is I tried to do it so I could just kind of look like, by spring, it looked like a manure spreader had come through and fertilized the field. But now I've been trying to do it more intensively and put a lot of carbon down. And I try to get like a couple inches. And actually, what I used to do is in the spring, after I gave it a couple of months rest, because I still had fescue to kill. And fescue is hard to kill. You disc it, and you're going to multiply it. And so I would use a rototiller, a Howard rotavator, and I would just till real shallow and just to kill. But now what I've been finding is if I put enough carbon down, I try to get every square foot covered, I can actually mulch that fescue to death. And so that's pretty exciting that I can actually do without tilling it. So again, I'm just learning about these things, but it's exciting. Now compare that, I'm worried about water quality. I'm not doing this. We know that if you do this, you're gonna have some problems with water quality, aren't you? What I observed, of course, is the cow's body temperature is 101 degrees. And so when it drops the manure on the snow, it'll melt right down and freeze. And so it's like, it freezes hard. And it has some integrity in that regard. It's not as much of a threat for water quality. And with all the carbon around it. And I try not to put the hay in the waterways so that they put manure there. But, so we're trying to watch out for water quality effects. Now here's where we milk the cows. The cows come in on this side over here and they go out here and we're milking part of it. And then we are attached to a processing plant. So we process our milk on the farm. Here's our processing plant. And we have a simple double 8 milking parlor. It's a New Zealand style, very simple and easy to use. And of course, every dairy farm has a milking parlor, milk house with a bulk tank that cools the milk right away. But what we're different about is that we process our milk in the next room. So we can connect our pipes up, sanitize them, pump the milk into the next room on processing days. And the milk comes through the pipe here into our pasteurizing vats. And so we bottle milk, we make whole milk and 2% in skim milk, we bottle cream, and we make yogurt and cheese on the farm too. And we market it all locally through 3 grocery stores. This is one that's locally, and about 20 restaurants. This one is locally owned, and they're pretty much a whole food store. They have a lot of bulk products, and what's interesting, and if anybody knows anything about Fairfield, Iowa, it's a little different demographics for Iowa. But anyway, this is their produce section, and most produce sections have a little corner for organic, but this is all organic. And they have a little corner over here that's...
That's the dream.
So we have a good customer base. I'm sorry?
I would like to go to that.
You'd like to go to that store, yes. So here's our product on the shelf, our whole milk and 2%. And we don't homogenize the milk, and it's Jersey milk, so it's like 5.5% butter fat. And so you can see the cream line on the milk here. And the cream we bottle is whipping cream, and we make yogurt too. We put it in tall quarts. We don't have a cup filler, but it's Jersey milk, and they love it because it's a higher solids product. And so most of our customers are pretty much attuned to the idea that whole milk is the whole food, and skim milk is not a whole food. Here's our skim milk over here, not very much. And so just kind of to summarize where we're at here, this is where we started, this farm that we came to 25 years ago almost. And this was the corn crib that was there left over. And the reason I'm showing this is that my neighbor sold us this farm. He's a realtor. And he said he's seen a lot of farms over the years disappear, fall down. And this is the first one he ever saw that came back to life. So here's that corn crib here, and we attached a workshop on the side here. And we lived in Susan, my wife, who's right here. We lived upstairs in this processing plant for 4 years while we built this house on the property. So we kind of resurrected a farmstead. And the thing is that we did it on not that many acres. The average farm in Iowa, you need a couple thousand acres to make a living, quote, but nobody's making a living hardly on it. But the point, I think, is that it is possible to get into agriculture, and that was asked, the question was asked at the plenary session today. I think that if people look for a niche and start small, in Iowa, for example, there's an extension specialist who has what he calls the $1 Million Dairy Program. And you don't buy land, you rent about 80 acres, and you buy 80 cows. Cows multiply. You don't buy any machinery. Machineries fall apart. You never come out in the morning and see a big tractor had a baby tractor. But cows... But cows multiply, and so his idea is in 20 years you build enough capital so that you've actually accrued $1 million worth of capital, and people are doing that just with grazing systems. I think that's my last slide.